Good day, everyone. I am Eliza Malakas and I'm assigned to discuss the specific applications in the measurement of provisions. Specific applications. No provision should be made for future operating losses, including those relating to our structuring, as they do not meet the definition of a liability at the end of the financial reporting period. So, an expectation of future operating losses indicates that a certain assets of the operation may be impaired, and the entity tests these assets under the IAS 36 impairment of assets. Second one is provisions should be made for onerous contracts, being contracts where the unavoidable future costs under the contract exceed the expected future economic benefits. Example is the leased property sublet at a lower rent. So when we say sublet or sublease a sublease agreement, is this is the addition or it adds someone new to an existing list. Usually, the new person or the subletter replaces someone who is moving out, which is the sublessor or the sublessee. But it can also happen that the new person is being added to a list wherein a sublease is a binding contract that is a binding contract, and all of the same rules and rental laws is applied to everyone involved in the regular list. Our structuring is a sale or termination of a line of business, closure of business locations, changes in management structure or fundamental organization of the company. No obligation arises for the sale of an operation until there is a binding sale agreement. So even when an entity has taken a decision to sell an operation and announce that decision publicly, it cannot be committed to the sale until a purchaser has been identified and there is a binding sale agreement. Lastly, a provision for restructuring cost is recognized only when the general recognition criteria are met. More specifically, a constructive obligation only arises when a detailed formal plan is in place and it has begun or been announced to those affected by it. A board decision is not enough. Restructuring provisions should include only direct expenditures caused by the restructuring, not costs that associated with the ongoing activities of the entity. So how do we measure provisions? The amount recognized as a provision should be the best estimate of the expenditure required to settle the present obligation at the financial reporting date. So, what do we mean by best estimate? Best estimate is the amount of an entity that would rationally pay to settle the obligation at the end of reporting period or to transfer it to a third party at that time. So, best estimate. Kumbaga yun pong pinaka posible or pinaka makatwiran na ilalabas natin para masettle yung obligation or para mabayaran yung dapat bayaran. So, para po mas maintindihan, example po ng provision ay yung court case. Let's say po, nakagawa ka po ng kalokohan before, therefore kakasuhan ka po. So, doon po sa example na yon, let's say po, syempre po yung another party ay magre-required or magre-require ng certain amount, let's say po ay 1.5 million. And then yung pong court ay mayroon din pong amount if mananalo po yung kalaban, let's say 2 million po yung sa court. And then tayo po as the management ay mayroon pong sariling estimate which is 1 million. Therefore po ang susundin natin na best estimate is 1 million since we measure the provision nga po through the management's best estimate. So, ang susundin po natin is yung estimation po natin, hindi po ng third party at hindi din po ng court. Let's say po, nanalo po yung kalaban, therefore magbayad po tayo ng suggested amount po ng court, which is yung sinabi ko nga po kanina na 2 million. And in that case po, hindi na po siya magiging provision since alam na po natin or hindi na po uncertain yung timing and hindi na din po uncertain yung amount. Kasi nga po, given na po yung 2 million pesos na ilalabas para po masettle yung obligation. Okay, so we have different approaches on how are we going to identify what is the best estimate. So first is if single obligation is being measured, the individual most likely outcome adjusted for the effect of other possible outcomes may be the best estimate. Second one, if range of possible outcomes, the midpoint of the range is used assuming that each point in that range is as likely as any other. So dito po sa range of possible outcomes, gagamitin po natin yung midpoint in order to identify the best estimate. For example po, wherein yung highest range will be added to the lowest range divided by 2. And then yung answer po doon, yun po yung magiging best estimate. And the third approach that we can use is the if large population of items, expected value method is used. It weighs all possible outcomes by their associated possibilities. So, yung examples po nito ay nandun po sa mga next slide. So, before po tayo mag-proceed sa mga examples on how to measure provisions, i-discuss lang po natin muna yung measurement of considerations wherein yung una po is yung risk and uncertainties. Ito po yung mga other risk na makakaapekto sa provision, therefore, i-consider po natin siya sa pag-measure ng best estimate. Next is the present value of obligation. Let's say, masasettle po natin siya pero hindi pa ngayon. Therefore, mayroon pong time factor and ko-convert po natin siya into present value using present value method. Next po is the future events. So, while nag-consider po tayo ng provision, ito po yung mga future events. Example po nito ay yung changes in tax rules or yun pong changes in technology or new legislation, mga ganun po. Yung next po is expected disposal of assets. So, dito po, titignan po natin kung at the middle, kung kailan po nagdi-dispose yung asset at kung kailan po mawawala na po yung asset na pinag-uusapan. Kasi hindi po lahat ng liability ay nag-arise purely liability. Meron din pong liability na nag-arise dahil po may asset ka. So, for example po nito ay yung decommissioning or abandonment cost. Kunwari po, bumili ka po ng property, like yung pong sa pagmimina, yung pong lupa doon, since nasisira po siya while ginagamit po natin, yung liability po natin doon is yung ibalik po sa kung ano po yung dati yung property. So, dito po, nagkaroon po tayo ng liability dahil po meron po tayong asset. Next po is the reimbursements. So, dito po sa reimbursements, since liability nga po yun, kailangan po natin maglabas ng certain amount and i-consider po natin, let's say meron pong willing mag-reimburse nung amount na ilalabas natin, like po yung mga insurance company, i-consider din po natin yan sa may measure. Next po is the changes in provision. So, dito po, let's say po, nagkaroon po ng, dun po sa, during the provision, ay nagkaroon po ng changes sa kung paano ka po mag-estimate. Ko-consider din po yun. Next po is use of provision. Dito po, kung ano pong use ng provision, kung para saan po siya, dun lang po. For example po, for environmental contamination lang po yung provision, dun lang po yun, hindi po siya pwedeng gamitin sa iba. Lastly po is onerous contract. When we say onerous contract, this is a contract in which the unavoidable cost of meeting the obligation under the contract exceed the economic benefits expected to be received under it. So, if, let's say, nangyari po to, i-consider din po natin to sa pag-measure ng ating provision. So, proceed po tayo dito sa first example On November 5, 2026, Pepper Company truck was in an accident with an auto driven by Gracial. Pepper received notice on January 15, 2027 of a lawsuit for 700,000 pesos damages for personal injuries suffered by Gracial. Fagan Price, Pepper's legal counsel, believe it's probable that Gracial will be awarded an estimated amount in the range between 200,000 pesos and 450,000, and no amount is a better estimate of potential liability than any other amount because each point in the range is as likely as any other. The 2026 financial statements were issued on March 1, 2027. So dito po, kailangan po muna natin tignan if probable po ba yung provision. Kasi 'di ba po one of the uh, ways on how are we going to recognize the provision po is it should be probable. And sabi po dito sa problem, it's probable the legal counsel believed that it's probable. Therefore, pasok po siya sa pagre-recognize ng provision. So the question is, what amount of loss should be accrued on December 31, 2026? So ang computation po natin dito, ang ginamit pala po natin dito ang approach is yung midpoint. So ang gagamitin po nating solution, yung range po na binigay kanina dun sa problem is 450,000 and 200,000 between po dun. So ang gagawin po natin, 200,000 plus 450,000 divided by 2 is 325,000. Therefore po, the amount of loss that will be accrued on December 31, 2026 is 325,000 pesos. The problem number 2, during 2026, Pepper Company is the defendant in a patent infringement lawsuit. Analyst Kading, Pepper's lawyer, believes that there is a 70% chance that the court will dismiss the case and the entity will incur no outflow of economic benefits. This is with the help of Bonnie and Frank, analyst employees. So, however, if the court rules in favor of the claimant, analyst believes that there is a 20% chance that the entity will be required to pay damages of 200,000 pesos and an 80% chance that the entity will be required to pay damages of 100,000 pesos. Other outcomes are unlikely. So, bago po tayo mag-proceed dun sa next slide, ino-note lang po natin yung mga important amounts and data po na galing dito sa problem 2. So, the court is expected to rule in late 2028. There is no indication that the claimant will settle out of court. So, sabi ko nga po kanina, yung pong ino-note, so, ang question pala muna po, what is the measurement of the provision for lawsuit? So, the answer po dito ay 0. So, bakit po? So, going back po dun sa problem kanina, ang sabi po dun, Pepper's lawyer believes that there is a 70% chance that the court will dismiss the case and that the entity will incur no outflow of economic benefits. So, sa pag-consider po na o sa pag-recognize po ng provision, dapat po probable po, like yung po yung ginawa po natin dun sa first problem kanina. So, dito po, 70% po yung chance na mananalo po tayo. So, wala po tayong babayaran. So, hindi po siya ma-recognize as provision. Kasi, yun nga po, mas malaki po yung chance na mananalo tayo. So, therefore po, wala po tayong babayaran or kailangang ilabas na amount. So, hindi po siya provision. So, ang magiging answer po natin doon as the measurement of the provision for lawsuit po ay 0. Since malaki nga po yung chance na mananalo tayo, which is 70%. For the illustrative problem number 3, during 2026, Pepper Company is the defendant in a patent infringement lawsuit. Analyst Keating, Pepper's lawyer, believes that there is a 30% chance that the court will dismiss the case and the entity will incur no outflow of economic benefits. However, if the court rules in favor of the claimant, analyst believes that there is a 20% chance that the entity will be required to pay damages of 200,000 and an 80% chance that the entity will be required to pay damages of 100,000 pesos. Other outcomes are unlikely. The court is expected to rule in late 2028. There is no indication that the claimant will settle out of court. A 7% risk adjustment factor to the probability weighted expected cash flows is considered appropriate to reflect the uncertainties in the cash flow estimates. An appropriate discount rate is 5% per year. The present value of 1 at 5% for 2 periods is 0.907. So, bago po tayo mag-proceed dun sa question, inonote ko lang po itong 7% risk adjustment factor wherein ito po yung isa dun sa discuss natin na measurement of considerations which is yung number 1 po, yung risk and uncertainties. Ito naman pong second, pong appropriate discount rate is 5% per year. The present value, ito po yung pasok naman po ito dun sa measurement of considerations number 2 which is yun pong present value of obligation. The question is, what is the measurement of the provision for lawsuit? So, ang gagamitin po natin ditong approach is yung expected value. So, ganito po. Meron, in case po na matalo tayo, may babayaran po na 200,000, 20% po, nagbabayad tayo ng 200,000 and meron pong 80% chance, nagbabayad tayo ng 100,000. So, yung 200,000 po, i-multiply po natin siya sa 20%, which is equals to 40,000 pesos. And yung 100,000 po, i-multiply natin sa 80%, which is equals to 80,000. And then, i-add po natin yung dalawang yon, yung 40,000 plus 80,000, which is equals to 120,000. So, na-mention po kanina dun sa problem na meron pong 30% chance na i-dismiss po ng court yung case. Meaning, mananalo po tayo dun. So, yung 30% po, i-multiply po natin yung 120,000 sa 70%. Kasi po, di ba po yung 120,000 po, yun po yung expected na babayaran po natin in case na manalo po yung kalaban. So, since mayroon pong 70% chance na mananalo po yung kalaban natin, i-multiply po natin yung 70% dun po sa 120,000 which is equals to 84,000. And then, meron po tayong 30% chance na matatalo po yung kalaban. So, meaning po, mananalo po tayo, wala po tayong kailangan bayaran. So, 30% times 0 is 0. So, 84,000 plus 0 is equals to 84,000. So, yung 84,000 po, hindi pa po ito yung ating best estimate since meron pong binanggit kanina na 7% risk adjustment and meron pong present value obligation. Yun pong sa 0.907. So, yun pong 84,000 na na-compute natin kanina, itatimes po natin sa 1.07 at ita-times po sa 0.907. Ang magiging answer po is yung 81,521. And ito pong 81,521 pa lang po ang ating magiging best estimate. Ito na po yung magiging final answer po natin, considering po yung risk adjustment and yung pong present value.